Ladies and gentlemen, remain seated
as
our
was
delegation
U.S. President
departs.
Donald Trump answering questions from reporters in New York for the last hour and 20 minutes. He covered a lot of ground, and we want to get to a lot of it. But first, I'm going to bring in Ellen Morrow in Washington. You've been watching this along with all of us here. Ellen, I think the big headline for our viewers is obviously what he said about rejecting a meeting with Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and the implications for NAFTA.
That's right, Vashi. And the president used some particularly strong language in talking about that. He was simply asked, did you reject a meeting? And his tone was really sort of flippant towards Canada, saying, yeah, I did, going on to say that he isn't happy with how the negotiations are going, very unhappy with negotiations, and taking a direct shot at Foreign Affairs Minister Chrystia Freeland. He didn't name her, but President Trump said, we don't like their representative very much. We're not getting along at all with their negotiators, and that he personally does not like NAFTA. He also referenced something that's been reported in the past, although not verified, in terms of this threat that he makes when it comes about taxing cars. He said in this appearance that he's thinking about taxing cars. That would be the mother lode, and that would frankly be good for the United States. So some really strong language from the president on NAFTA, and again, attacks on Canada. He says that he will refuse to use the name NAFTA, that he wants to call the deal the USMC, but that he also said it will probably or possibly be USM if Canada does not make a deal. So perhaps some of the strongest language we've heard from the president directly on both how the negotiations are standing, and again, taking that direct, unflattering shot at Chrystia Freeland.
And just really quickly before I let you go, Ellen, what's the big, I mean, he spoke a lot about his Supreme Court pick, Brett Kavanaugh. What did he say? What's the big headline out of that, do you think?
He did, and certainly that's the big story. Looking forward to tomorrow morning, the testimony of Christine Blasey Ford and Brett Kavanaugh on Capitol Hill. Now, the president repeated what he's already said in the past, calling these allegations a Democratic smear job. One thing he hasn't said in the past, though, is saying that his own allegations that he's faced in the past influences his thinking, saying that he's faced false allegations and that is part of why, he's still standing by Brett Kavanaugh. He did say, though, and signaling perhaps a softening somewhat, although perhaps it's too much to actually say that. But he did say that he is open to listening to what Christine Blasey Ford has to say on Capitol Hill tomorrow, and that if she, that he can be persuaded to perhaps withdraw Kavanaugh if he believes her and finds that Kavanaugh is guilty of what Ford is accusing him of. But that was just one small part. The overarching theme he had on Kavanaugh was that these are false allegations. If they were real, they would have been reported a long time ago, and that this is all a Democratic smear campaign, Vashi.
Okay, thanks a lot, Ellen. Ellen Morrow in Washington. We're going to bring in the Power panel now to assess what we just heard from U.S. President Donald Trump. Joining me in Toronto is Amanda Alvaro of Pomp and Circumstance, and here with me in studio, Tim Powers of Summa Strategies, political commentator, and former NDP MP Françoise Boivin, and our own Chris Hall, host of CBC Radio's The House. Hi, everyone. Thank you for your patience. I'm going to do a quick go-around because then we want to get into the Canadian news as well. Amanda, why don't I start with you? Those NAFTA comments, I should say that our colleague Katie Simpson spoke to a senior source in the government who says that no meeting was formally requested, but obviously some very strong rhetoric from the president.
Very strong, but I mean, this is the second solo presser that he's held like this. So to hear it verbally from him versus the rants that we normally hear over Twitter, this isn't unlike the kind of comments that he's made previously. He's called the Prime Minister weak and dishonest. He's taken aim and shots at Canada over and over again. So it's not surprising to hear him use that kind of rhetoric. At the same time, though, it was definitely strong, and to then take aim at Chrystia Freeland and suggest that there was, this personal dislike. We don't like the negotiator, which also is a signal to the rest of us, to Canadians, that we're probably doing something right. We're pushing the right buttons. We're moving things forward. We're definitely not laying down or laying back on some of their demands. But then to use that auto card to make sure that, that auto card was played, and to call it the mother lode, it's like he has no limits, no boundaries to the kind of language he'll use.
Yeah, picking up on that, it was vintage Trump, right? The only other politician, ironically, he mirrors in length is Fidel Castro. Perhaps he should study Castro. No, he went on for hours.
Did condemn socialism.
Though he did condemn
minutes,
socialism. His supporters will love this performance. They will absolutely eat it up. His opponents will hate it. Question is, where are the people in the middle? And that really matters, I guess, as it gets towards the midterm. The only other point I would make at this juncture, picking up on something Amanda said, he got a lot of questions about what kind of message are you sending to women by standing up for Judge Kavanaugh. And here in the same breath, and the rest of that press corps may not know it, he's slamming Canada's trade negotiator, who happens to be a leading woman around the globe. It's there's patterns there that are hard to miss.
Françoise?
I'm dead tired. I mean, that's the worst hour and 20 minutes in my life, honestly. But at the same time, it gave me a sense. I already follow what Trump is doing from one day to the other, so we have a good sense. He is true to himself, but I think that hour and 20 minutes really will be to study for years to come.
Totally.
It gives you such an indication. I just would love to be in the White House and see what a day, although he does seem to watch so much TV, I don't know if he's more quiet during those days, but it was absolutely amazing. Just from one to the other, in one sentence, he'd say something and then he'd say the contraire. It's incredible. I think he mixed up. I'm not sure it was an official meeting that was asked on the NAFTA issue. I think we're all referring to that snubbing that he did at the UN lunch yesterday that I happened to catch on your show at the tail end. And I'm like, my God, did my prime minister just been snubbed by the president? And obviously he's in the doghouse. I'm so not. It infuriated me so much, Vashi, on the women issue, because he gives so much more credit. I all agree about the presumption of innocence, and that it might be tough, but at the same time, you have to give a certain balance, which he had zero of. He's more interested about himself and what he suffered in life and how he was accused. And I think it was, in my humble opinion, disgusting. And as the last question went, what about the message you're sending to young men and to look at him again, defend Judge Kavanaugh, and make it all about himself?
Well, he was, to be fair, asked about the accusations against him the first time.
I know. But again, he could have become the bigger man, and because he almost recouped it when he talked about the fact that he's going to listen and watch. I do think his verdict is already in.
Chris, final word to you on this.
I often struggle to distinguish the Twitter president from the president. And I think today was the first time I've seen him in a setting like this, where he was the Twitter president, but in person. It's important for Canadians to look at this and wonder, in the art of the deal, which he always talks about, whether he has now made a conclusion that it's not possible to get a deal on his terms with Canada and what that might mean going forward. Clearly, he's suggesting he is prepared, whatever the cost might be to American workers and to Canadian workers, to slap a 25 or 15% tariff on cars, depending on what it is. That's the first thing. The second thing, I guess, is a personal insult. This is a person himself who's been subject to smears, he says, and to barbs, yet he's perfectly willing to use them himself. So we don't like the trade negotiator. Well, so what? Make a deal. That's got nothing to do with it. I take Francois' point. She's a woman, and it's hard to escape that notion that this is partly personal for him. And to what extent, I guess my last point is, to what extent does his personal hubris, his personal animosity, his personal opinions about the people he deals with, how much does that influence the decisions he will ultimately make?